The senator from Mississippi.
Ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today greatly disturbed and upset, as are many Americans, by the comments President Obama made on Monday to outgoing Russian President Dmitry Medvedev at the Nuclear Security Summit in Seoul, Korea. The exchange, which was accidentally recorded by a Russian journalist, suggests that President Obama's stance on missile defense will change after the November election. It implies that the President is willing to make more concessions to an authoritarian government that has caused American concern time and time again. It raises questions about what else might be hidden on the President's agenda if he secures a second term in the White House. Americans can view the recording themselves as President Obama tells Mr. Medvedev, quote, "On all these things, but particularly missile defense, this can be solved, but it's important for him to give me space," unquote. Him meaning former and future President Vladimir Putin. Mr. Medvedev responds by saying, and I quote, "Yeah, I understand. I understand your message about space for you," unquote. President Obama then goes on to say, and I quote again, "This is my last election. After my election, I have more flexibility." More flexibility. It is unbelievable and chilling that President Obama would make his election a factor in how he deals with an important national security issue that could have dangerous implications for America and its allies. Even the hint of compromising on our missile defense capability is reckless when the prospect of nuclear-armed missiles is a real and growing threat. Equally alarming is the looming question lingering over what the President actually means when he says more flexibility. The administration continues to press for resetting bilateral relations, but fails to follow through on an approach that takes into consideration how Russia has not made good on its promises in the past. Simply put, we cannot trust the Russian government to keep its word. We have no reason to believe that greater cooperation will come from giving the Russians what they want. The question now arises, how can we trust our own president not to say one thing before the election and yet do something entirely different afterwards? Let us not forget, the Russian ambassador vetoed 2 United Nations Security Council resolutions supporting the Syrian people, a move that prompted U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Susan Rice to say that Russia had decided to stand with a dictator. Indeed, Russia seems comfortable standing beside a dictator. In addition, Russian officials rejected the idea of sanctions against Iran, tougher sanctions against Iran, despite a report from the International Atomic Energy Agency reinforcing concerns about Iran's nuclear program. Russia also voted against the United Nations General Assembly resolution, expressing concern over the violations of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights in North Korea. Many of my colleagues and I have come to the floor on multiple occasions to express my concern with Russia's deteriorating rule of law and respect for human rights. This is not the kind of relationship that President Obama promised when he pressed for passage of the New START Treaty in late 2010 over strong objections from many of my colleagues. It sends the wrong signal to our allies throughout Europe who are worried about undue pressure from Russia. At the end of the day, better U.S.-Russian relations are not a foregone conclusion. And President Obama would be wise to remember that one-sided promises are not the means to get there. He should also not forget that the Constitution requires the advice and consent of the Senate on foreign policy decisions. Over the coming months, the Senate will likely take up several issues related to Russia, and I look forward to having a frank discussion about the President's ideas and the President's intentions. Mr. Obama's comments in Seoul are only one instance of the President pledging to have more flexibility after the election day. But they rightly cause us to speculate about what else he expects to do. Americans are right to wonder what other promises are being made that we do not know about. At the end of the exchange in Seoul, President Obama and President Medvedev clasped hands, and Mr. Medvedev promised, "I will transmit this information to Vladimir. I will transmit this information to Vladimir." In other words, but for the accident of an open microphone, the President's intentions would have been known by Mr. Putin, but not known by the American people. Mr. Medvedev's reply is a grim reminder of what happens when one person is able to seize unrestrained power, as Mr. Putin has demonstrated, and should be a lesson for all of us. It also should give all Americans pause as we approach this fall's election. I yield the floor.